Chapter 4. Nocturne. With Simon safely reunited with his mother and the train's commotion finally still, the group was left to decide how to make use of their limited time before the next leg of their journey. Giovanni reminded them of the looming deadline. If they were to catch Cavallaro's performance of Aida at La Scala on January 12th, they would have to board the Orient Express again by morning. Each sought something different in the Swiss morning light. Rose, still shaken by her forced return to the dream world to rescue Simon, asked Claudia for a reprieve.
You'll get a little advance on your monthly pay.
Claudia told her, soft but firm.
Don't spend it all in one go.
Rose thanked her mistress and made her way to the Arlaud Museum, drawn by the soft promise of silence and art. Giovanni was visibly disoriented by the return to reality. To him, the Dreamlands had been a cathedral of light, a divine place more vivid than this world. He announced his intention to visit the Grand Lausanne Cathedral, hoping to find solace, or at least a place to breathe in the echoes of God. With the lover's heart gifted by the Bruja still in his pocket, he walked uphill toward the Gothic spires, his cassock catching the wind. Elijah Marsh headed to secure lodgings for the night. A pamphlet led him to the Château d'Ouchy, nestled against the snowy banks of Lake Léman. The old fortress-turned-hotel was thick with diplomats and officers, many of them Turkish. Elijah remembered that the Treaty of Lausanne negotiations had resumed in earnest only months prior. Curious observer of geopolitics, he planned to linger in the bar, ears wide open. Claudia and Leopold, meanwhile, hailed a cab destination, 50 Rue Saint-Étienne, the address on Edgar Wellington's mysterious letter. Claudia reminded Leopold not to mention the Sedefkar Simulacrum just yet. They would test the waters. They parted ways with a final agreement. They would reconvene by 6 at the train station. The taxidermist. It was early in the day when Claudia and Leopold climbed into the handsome cab and handed the driver a slip of paper, 50 Rue Saint-Étienne. The cab clattered off into the cobbled heart of Lausanne, where the buildings grew older, their facades more weathered, and their windows curtained against the cold. The streets smelled of ink, coffee, and thawing ice. Children laughed in the distance, leather school satchels bumping against their backs as they raced toward some unseen bell. The cab turned down a narrow lane where the paving stones glistened with dew. And there it was, a modest 2-story shopfront bearing a small, unassuming sign, Wellington and Sons, Taxidermy. Claudia and Leopold eyed each other.
Again, play it cautious.
Claudia murmured,
And no mention of the simulacrum. Let's see how he plays it.
Leopold nodded, his breath frosting the air. A sign in the dusty window read, Open, but when Claudia tried the handle, the door refused. She nearly walked into it.
Locked,
she said under her breath. Claudia knocked on the door. From inside, a muffled voice,
Coming.
in both English and French. A moment later, the door creaked open to reveal a tall, balding man in a worn vest and rolled sleeves. His eyes were sunken but alert. He gestured for them to enter.
You have a piece for me, or are you just curious?
He asked in a lilting English tinged with fatigue.
Actually, yes.
Claudia replied, smiling graciously.
A rather sentimental case. We have a cat, Percy. Elderly, soon to pass. We were hoping to inquire about your rates.
The man didn't introduce himself, but ushered them inside without hesitation. The shop was warm, overly so. Most of the curtains were drawn, and a fire roared in the hearth. The smell was a cloying mix of tanned leather, smoke, and old formaldehyde. Around the room, glass-eyed animals, foxes, wolves, birds of prey, perched and loomed in frozen menace. They seemed ready to pounce.
You can come upstairs,
the man offered.
I can pour you a cup of tea, or coffee if you prefer. We can talk more comfortably.
They heard shuffling behind the shop, soft dragging steps.
My brother William, working on a bear piece. William, we have company.
A grunt was the only reply. Claudia's confidence faltered for a breath. Was this really Edgar Wellington? As they sat at a worn kitchen table, the man busied himself with china cups and a brass coffee pot.
Please,
he said.
Sit down.
Thank you for your hospitality.
Claudia offered, steadying her voice.
It's my job.
The man replied.
Not many come for taxidermy these days.
Claudia leaned in slightly.
Just to be sure, are we speaking with Mr. Edgar Wellington?
He blinked.
Yes, I'm Edgar.
Claudia smiled.
Then allow me to properly introduce myself. Claudia, and this is Mr. Leopold Lambert. We were sent by a family that once employed your services. The Lorians.
She hesitated, a faint flicker of forgetfulness as the lie caught on her tongue.
From Poissy.
Edgar blinked, processing.
I don't know any Lorians,
He admitted.
but Poissy, that is interesting.
His eyes gleamed faintly, curious, not suspicious.
Villa Estate?
He asked.
Yes,
Claudia replied smoothly, lying better now.
they mentioned the house had old foundations. You were mentioned as someone with an interest in local histories.
I had sent a letter to that address once,
Edgar said, voice rising with excitement.
but I never expected a reply.
Leopold excused himself to find the restroom.
Out back.
Edgar said.
Small shed. Do be careful. William is frail and odd.
Leopold gave a polite nod and stepped outside, then paused just past the kitchen door. Leopold slipped into a side room. He moved fast, quiet. A small bed, iron frame, a table with scattered books, vials, under the bed, a syringe and morphine bottle. On the desk, a diary. He skimmed the pages. Edgar had gotten a scroll related to the Sedefkar Simulacrum from Raoul Malon for cigarettes. He was unable to translate it. He had started using morphine to sleep, bad dreams, ever since the war. A certain duke had promised to help, giving him access to something that let him project into a dream version of Lausanne. Edgar had learned how to move objects between waking and dream. He had hidden the scroll in the dream version of Lausanne, hoping to increase its value before selling it to the duke. He needed a second buyer to play both sides. Inside the kitchen, Claudia steered the conversation.
You sent that letter to the Poissy Villa. May I ask, what drew your attention to that place?
Edgar poured the coffee.
A scroll,
He said quietly.
given to me during the war, from a soldier, Raoul Malon. He gave it to me for a pack of cigarettes.
The name Malon rang through Claudia's mind like a bell. Captain Louis Malon, the man who arrested Comte Fanalic in 1789. Could Raoul be a descendant?
I tried to learn what I could.
Edgar continued.
The scroll, it was unlike anything I'd seen. A mixture of Arabic and Turkish, impossible to decipher fully. But it spoke of a simulacrum, a statue of terrible power. I chased leads for years. All of them went cold.
Claudia leaned in.
And what became of the scroll?
Edgar hesitated, then offered a weary smile.
I'm trying to sell it. I want to take care of William.
Claudia placed a hand on the table.
I would like to buy it.
Edgar blinked, stunned.
Would you really?
He stood abruptly.
I'll need to make a phone call to arrange the sale. Give me a moment. There's a telephone cabin outside.
Claudia nodded.
Of course.
As he disappeared down the stairs, Leopold returned quietly to the kitchen, and when Edgar was safely out of earshot, he and Claudia debriefed quickly.
He's a dreamer,
Leopold said.
just like Karkaroff, just like Mackenzie.
Claudia's brow furrowed.
Then we'll need more than money to find that scroll.
Coffee and books. Rose stepped out into the crisp January morning, coat wrapped tight, breath curling like fog. Lausanne shimmered with post-dreamland unreality, too sharp, too cold, too awake. She was grateful to have a few hours alone. She'd chosen the Arlord Museum, a quiet space tucked between ancient lanes and stone stairways, its reputation modest but promising. The building stood white and squat, with Corinthian columns slightly too proud for its scale. Inside, the exhibits were subdued, and to Rose's quiet dismay, a bit dull. A few visitors wandered between paintings and etchings without much enthusiasm.
Should have gone to the Canton Library,
Muttered a passing couple.
Supposed to have over 100,000 books.
Rose's ears perked. She adjusted her scarf and slipped back into the street. The Canton Library loomed like a temple of thought. High arches and ornate windows caught the light with reverence. Rose paused outside, tilting her head up in awe. For a moment, it was easy to imagine the world was sane again. But something felt off. As she walked the snow-crusted sidewalks toward the library entrance, she noticed the people, locals, passers-by, students, dragging their feet. Their faces wore exhaustion like heavy cloaks. Pale, with deep bags under their eyes. Rose swallowed. She steered clear, slipping past a weary knot of students with greyish skin before pushing through the library's grand doors. Inside, the air smelled of parchment and polish. The atrium was vast and warm, golden light spilling from a vaulted ceiling. Shelves stretched in all directions like the ribs of some great sleeping beast. Rose approached the front desk with a sunny smile.
Pardon, when does the next tour begin?
The clerk, a bespectacled young man with sandy hair and a librarian's soul, smiled kindly.
I'm afraid tours are only given on Sundays.
Oh,
Rose said with a soft pout.
that's a shame. I have to leave tomorrow. I was really hoping to see the archives.
She tilted her head, teasing.
Do you give private tours, mister?
He blushed, just a little.
Charles, well, I suppose I could show you around, briefly.
Charles led her through the echoing corridors, speaking with the glow of a man who truly loved his work. They passed manuscripts written in Latin, scrolls of pre-Christian myth, accounts of Roman settlers, medieval saints, and regional occult practices. He pointed out rare illuminated books, whispered the names of forgotten chroniclers, and explained that Lausanne once sat atop a pagan crossroads, a place where things gathered before Christianity pushed them underground. When Rose inquired about artifacts, Charles admitted their focus was mostly textual.
But we do have books on Lausanne's more peculiar relics, sculptures, oddities. I'll gather a few for you.
He returned with a small stack, 4 slim volumes, annotated and bookmarked. Rose thanked him and settled into a reading alcove. One passage about a sculpture named Otto the Grandson caught her attention. And that's when it happened. She leaned to turn a page, and her elbow collided with something solid. A man, mid-40s, scarf, coffee in hand, had just lowered himself into the seat beside her. The cup tilted, hot liquid splattering across the open pages of Rose's rare volumes.
Merde!
The man snapped, leaping up, flinging the cup aside. Rose blinked. The man rounded on her.
Stupid!
Rose jumped back and rushed to Charles, eyes wide, voice trembling.
I'm so sorry. There was this man. He just spilled coffee all over the books and started yelling. In French. I couldn't even understand.
Charles rushed over just as the man was yelling again, this time directly at Rose. When Charles tried to intervene, the man grabbed him by the collar, face red with fury. Rose took a breath and pinched herself. Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't have to say anything more. Charles shouted for security, voice shaking. The man was pulled away, still snarling. Later, Charles returned, face pale, hands fidgeting with a pencil stub. Rose offered gently,
Can I buy you a coffee or something?
He shook his head.
I think I just need a moment, alone.
She nodded, then drifted to the far window and sat still for a long time, pretending to read. Her cheeks burned. Eventually, she slipped out of the library and into the cold, her collar high, her steps fast, ashamed, flushed. The cathedral above. While the others scattered across Lausanne, seeking letters, lodgings, museums, or rest, Giovanni climbed the winding streets that led toward the high quarter of the city. The wind was sharp, threading through stone arches and over worn flagstones. There, resting atop a hill, like a sentinel of older days, stood the Lausanne Cathedral. A marvel of Gothic spires, flanked by weathered saints, gargoyles, and the golden moss of age. Its stones seemed to hum with faith and time. A small square lay before it, where children played under bare trees, and a few monks from the Abbé de Monteron, clad in heavy woolen habits, chatted softly in Latin. Giovanni entered alone. The great doors gave way to dim candlelight and the scent of old wood, incense and stone. He found a pew near the side chapel and sank into the silence. From his coat, he drew the lover's heart, the ruby the Bruja had gifted him in the Dreamlands. Its surface shimmered with a light of its own, pulsing faintly in the shadows. It was warm, and it throbbed with something old. Giovanni stared at it, thinking not with words but with instinct. It was beautiful and dangerous. He imagined it burning through flesh, searing away falsehoods, pushing back undead filth. He imagined it stripping the skin from heretics. A holy relic, or a demon's lure. A voice interrupted his thoughts.
That's a dangerous stone for a priest to hold.
He turned. A nun, no older than 30, dressed in crisp grey, stood beside the pew. Her eyes were sharp with wit, and she wore an expression that could only be called sassy. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder and nodded toward the ruby.
I've seen that before, or something like it, in an illuminated manuscript. One of the folk tales in our archives. A heart that burned the undead, yes, but also blinded the one who wielded it. Sang their skin, even if their cause was pure. Some say it was forged by martyrs, others by devils.
Giovanni raised an eyebrow.
And what do you believe?
She smiled.
I believe in books, not bedtime stories. That thing's just another relic dressed up in miracle drag. Folklore. Heresy.
He leaned forward, intrigued.
Where did you find the manuscript?
Archives of the cathedral.
She replied, a little proudly.
Follow me. I'll show you.
She led him down a narrow side corridor to a locked wooden door. With a twist of an iron key from her rosary belt, it creaked open. Inside, a tower of paper and shadow. Scrolls and tomes were stacked on high, in narrow wooden shelves that reached toward a vaulted ceiling lost in gloom. Dust motes drifted like incense smoke in the shafts of filtered morning light. Giovanni inhaled deeply. This was his kind of temple.
Do you have anything?
He asked softly.
On dreams, ones that feel real?
The nun gave him a long look, then nodded once. She returned a few minutes later with 3 tomes. Leather-bound, hand-scribed, annotated in margins by a dozen different hands. She paused.
Funny you ask, actually. I've been having strange dreams myself. Lately I feel like I'm drawn somewhere while I sleep. A place made of stone and filth. Like Lausanne, but old. Medieval.
Giovanni glanced up sharply.
And when you wake?
Exhausted.
She said simply.
Like I didn't rest at all.
He nodded solemnly.
Then perhaps the questions I'm asking are more important than either of us realized.
She gave him a strained smile.
I'm very tired,
She said, voice suddenly distant.
Forgive me, Father, but I'd like to go lie down.
You should.
He said.
God bless you.
She left without another word, her steps uncertain. Giovanni read for hours. One book detailed the Dreamlands, a place of beauty, of meaning, of celestial architecture and strange, peaceful cities. Another spoke of the realms in between, dark reflections of cities, distorted by suffering, seen only by the half-asleep and the damned. One page cited events in Paris 40 or 50 years earlier. A strange bout of insomnia plagued the city, where people claimed to dream not of the Belle Époque, but of a twisted ancient Lutece. Paris before it was Paris. Reports of suicides, people who simply never woke. It was blamed on stress from the Franco-Prussian War, but Giovanni knew better now. Dreams weren't just dreams, and perhaps not all sleepers woke in the same world. The Bavarian. The Château d'Ouchy stood tall on the edge of Lake Léman, its towers piercing the morning mist like fingers reaching towards some forgotten dream. The former medieval fortress had been reborn as a hotel of unrivaled charm, offering comfort to diplomats, aristocrats, and the quietly exiled. Dr. Elijah Marsh arrived at the reception desk with purpose. His words were polite, clipped, efficient. Within minutes, he had secured several rooms for his traveling companions. Everything about the place, from the soft linen to the carved oak door frames, exuded quiet money and old secrets. His work done, Elijah moved toward the bar, hoping to make better use of his solitude. The bar was warmly lit, alive with murmured French, clipped British vowels, and the sharp consonants of Turkish and German. The air was a mix of pipe smoke, cognac, and the scent of diplomacy on edge. Men in tailored suits leaned over high tables, discussing borderlines, reparations, treaties. The Treaty of Lausanne, Elijah remembered. The negotiations had been dragging on since last November. Turkey's fate hung in the balance. His eyes moved across the room and locked with another's. A beautiful young man, tall and angular, with pale blonde hair, ice blue eyes, and a jawline cut from alabaster. His features were unmistakably German, the kind Elijah recognized from old wartime dossiers and portraits. The man excused himself from a conversation with a German diplomat and walked straight to Elijah.
Hello.
He said in flawless English, the trace of Munich clinging to his vowels.
A pleasure to meet you. I am Maximilian von Wertheim.
Elijah stood, nodded.
Dr. Elijah Marsh. Are you local?
Elijah asked, gently prying. Maximilian gave a laugh, half wry, half performed.
Oh no. I've lived here for a decade. Fled from Bavaria, actually, after a rather predictable falling out with Papa. He chose my brother to inherit everything. So I came here, took the family allowance, and began spending it as extravagantly as possible.
He grinned.
I get a hate letter every fortnight. It's delicious.
Elijah smirked politely.
What brings you to Lausanne, Dr. Marsh?
We're just stopping off.
Elijah said.
I'm traveling with several companions. Needed a place to rest.
Maximilian gestured around.
A perfect choice. I've been holed up here for years, living off resentment and good wine.
There was a pause, one of those silences that weigh curiosity. Maximilian glanced at Elijah's wedding ring.
And does your wife travel with you?
Elijah's face tightened.
No,
He said.
she's ill. I don't believe in supernatural nonsense, but
He trailed off.
sometimes it feels like something otherworldly is draining her. Like something followed me home after the war.
Maximilian leaned in, eyes bright.
Oh, Dr. Marsh, that's fascinating. I'm no expert, of course, just a dilettante. But I do have a friend, the Duke, a wonderful Frenchman, highly educated, dabbles in the occult, actually. You'd find him most agreeable.
He sipped his drink.
Perhaps this evening? Le Chat Noir is quite atmospheric. You could bring your friends. The Duke might be able to help, or at least offer something interesting.
Elijah regarded the man, charming, yes, but also something else, hungry. Still, a lead was a lead.
I'll speak to the others.
Elijah said.
Dinner may be in order.
Planning an auction. The scent of roasted chicory drifted in through the half-open window of the Wellington kitchen as Claudia peered down Rue Saint-Étienne. From her vantage, she could see the phone booth a few doors down the sloped street. Edgar was still in there, pacing, hands animated, his voice muffled but intense.
He's been in there for a while.
Claudia said, nudging Leopold.
Look.
Leopold leaned over her shoulder, catching the silhouette of the man agitatedly gesturing through the glass of the phone booth. Edgar finally hung up, and after a few more minutes, shuffled back up toward the house, humming faintly. When he returned, his smile was nervous, flushed with excitement.
I have a friend who will be joining us shortly. Quite soon, in fact.
Claudia raised an eyebrow.
And who might this friend be?
Edgar waved the question off like a fly.
Oh, a good soul. Bit dramatic, but very well connected. Duke Jean Floresas des Esseintes, if you must know. French nobility, brilliant man, dabbles in the occult. You'll like him.
Claudia and Leopold exchanged a quick glance. The conversation meandered back to the scroll and the potential price, but Edgar seemed evasive, hedging every word with a new pause or side comment. Then, a loud knock at the front, and before anyone could respond, the door swung open. It felt to Claudia like an elephant had entered the shop. The wooden floor creaked and groaned as a rotund man strode into the kitchen, face round and jovial, adorned with mutton chops, a finely waxed mustache, and a cane tipped in silver.
Good heavens, Edgar. Company already seated?
Edgar leapt up.
Duke, my dear friend, you're early.
Nonsense, always on time.
The Duke grinned.
Now where's that tea, eh?
A pause, then in a hoarse voice, Edgar called out,
William, we have company.
A minute passed before William emerged, his face partially ruined from the war, his jaw twisted, one eye glassy and lifeless. Around his neck hung a small chalkboard on a leather cord. He quickly scrawled, "Lovely day, isn't it?" Then he went about preparing the drinks, limping slightly. The Duke took a seat, thumping a hand on the table.
Edgar tells me he's in possession of something most intriguing. And since I happen to be passionately interested in certain esoteric relics, here I am.
He stopped mid-sentence, staring at Claudia.
Wait a moment. Your face is familiar.
Claudia gave a measured smile.
Claudia Eddy. I don't believe we've had the pleasure.
Eddy? As in the Starkweather Moor Eddy expedition?
The Duke's eyes widened.
My dear lady, you were in the papers.
Claudia offered only the subtlest of nods. But the Duke quickly turned back to Edgar.
Now, old chap. This seems like quite the conundrum. You told me there was a scroll, up for sale. And here, I find you hosting a world-famous occultist.
He raised his brows.
Are you trying to drive the price up? Was £200 not sufficient?
Claudia interjected quickly.
I wasn't aware there were other parties interested.
Oh, don't fret,
The Duke said, wagging a finger.
Let's be civil. We can make this fun. A good old-fashioned auction. What say you?
Edgar wiped his brow.
Actually, the scroll isn't here.
Silence.
It's in a bank.
Edgar lied.
But Duke, perhaps you could show Miss Eddy and Mr. Leopold around town while I fetch it? A bit of Lausanne's charm, and then maybe dinner at Le Chat Noir?
The Duke's face brightened.
Excellent idea. I've other business to attend to anyway. And I had Max just earlier. He said he met a fascinating doctor. I'll make a reservation.
He stood.
7:30 then? Good?
Claudia smiled, all charm. Perfect. The Duke led them through Lausanne as if parading old secrets. They passed the cantonal library, whose archways Rose had walked through hours before, then wove through cobbled lanes and small plazas bustling with locals. They stopped at the cathedral, the Duke pointing to a gargoyle statue on the cornice, small, almost hidden.
Otto the grandson, they call him.
The Duke explained.
Sculpted in his likeness centuries ago. Legend says he climbs down at night to enact justice upon those who have wronged Lausanne.
Claudia cocked her head.
Based on what rules?
The Duke gave a smirk.
The Prince of Lausanne's, of course. But that's just a folktale.
The tour ended as afternoon faded, the low sun turning the lake gold. They arrived at Le Chat Noir, a decadent little bistro nestled in the winding streets. Gold-lettered signage, music from a gramophone behind the window, velvet curtains. The Duke quickly went in to make a reservation before taking his leave.
Alas,
the Duke said, glancing at his pocket watch,
I have other business.
He bowed and slipped away into the crowd. Claudia and Leopold waited only a beat, then followed. The streets were uneven with age. Claudia stumbled on a stone, but Leopold caught her, his hand around her arm just as the Duke turned a corner. They ducked into an alley, heartbeats quick. When they peered out again, the Duke was entering a small old manor set behind iron gates and a crumbling garden wall. A plaque on the wall read, Maison du Duc Jean Floresas des Esseintes. The windows were shuttered, the curtains drawn. Circling around, they spotted a back entrance, low and tucked behind hedges. The only way in, short of a midnight climb, would be the front gate, or a return when none were looking. Claudia exhaled, glancing to Leopold.
Perhaps tonight, during dinner, one of us could pay the dear Duke a little visit.
Le Chat Noir. By 6 o'clock, the light was already failing. Lausanne's rooftops dipped in deep blues and golds. A dry wind came off Lake Léman, rustling through the narrow streets as the 5 companions reconvened on the train platform. Elijah was already waiting.
I've secured the rooms,
he said with a faint smile.
Sumptuous, I dare say.
Claudia's eyes lit up.
Splendid. I was starting to worry we'd end this trip in straw and mothballs.
Together they strolled toward the Chateau d'Ouchy, that lakeside palace-turned-luxury hotel, its towers now glowing warm against the evening sky. Once inside, the group freshened up, facing mirrors, splashing cold water over dream-touched skin, pressing creases from fine fabrics. They looked like elegant travelers once more. And yet, not one of them felt the same. Over a quiet moment in the hallway, Claudia shared what she and Leopold had uncovered.
Well, I mean, it might not be anything.
She admitted, almost sheepishly.
But the man, Wellington, he was looking into the Sedefkar Simulacrum. He claims to have a scroll about it. I thought, even if it's not useful, it might make a nice souvenir from all this madness.
As they were preparing to depart for dinner at Le Chat Noir, Claudia pulled Rose aside. Her voice was soft but deliberate.
The Duke's address. I want you to snoop a bit. If he's lying to us, now's our best chance to find out.
She handed her maid a folded piece of paper and a crisp £10 note. Rose accepted it with a nod.
Everyone I met today.
Rose whispered.
They seemed tired. All of them. At the museum, at the library, even people in the street. Not sleepy, weary, like something's wrong.
Claudia's expression darkened.
Leopold found a diary, Edgar's, full of troubled visions. He's dreaming of an older Lausanne.
Rose arched an eyebrow.
Truly, the apple doesn't fall far. He's his father's son.
Claudia nodded grimly.
I'll broach the subject with our hosts.
They embraced lightly. Rose slipped away toward the darkness. Claudia turned to the others and summoned her smile. 5 minutes before 7, the group arrived at Le Chat Noir. The bistro was all velvet drapes, candlelight and warm laughter, a den of golden decadence hidden beneath black awnings. In the corner, a man rose from a luxurious table like a stage actor taking his cue. Maximilian von Wertheim, in a velvet waistcoat, his blonde hair loose at his shoulders, waved them over with both arms.
My friends,
He called.
do come! Tonight's dinner is on Papa!
He embraced Elijah with flourish, took Claudia's hand and kissed it, ignoring Giovanni's skeptical squint. The others sat, somewhat amused, somewhat exhausted.
Jerome,
Maximilian called to the sommelier.
be a dear and bring us your best bottle of red. Yes, the one you're saving. I've told them all about this place. The food seems humble, but the kitchen, oh, divine.
And so the wine flowed. Maximilian relished attention like a cat relishes sun. He launched into stories of family betrayal, of his estrangement from his father, of his brother, whom he accused of seducing his former fiancée.
Of course we dueled.
He said, swirling his wine.
And I chopped off his hand. My father declared me a criminal. So now I live here sending telegrams that make him boil. It brings me joy.
His grin was dazzling, his eyes dangerous. Another hour passed in rich conversation. The plates were cleared, the wine bottles emptied, and then Elijah's voice, sober despite the drink.
Maximilian, weren't we meant to meet the Duke and Mr. Wellington tonight?
Maximilian blinked.
Oh, surely they've been held back. Give them time. Another half hour? Let's enjoy one more bottle. On me, of course.
Claudia leaned over to Leopold, whispered.
I sent Rose to the Duke's house.
Leopold stiffened. He stood, adjusting his jacket.
Excuse me.
He said,
I believe I'll look for the lavatory.
but his steps were silent, swift. He slipped through the velvet curtain and out into the night. The haunting of the house. By the time Rose reached the Duke's address, the sky above Lausanne had grown dim and colorless. The pale moonlight filtered through a veil of thin clouds. The manor, as described, sat hidden behind a high stone wall, wrapped in silence. Vines crawled up its masonry like veins. Though the building was not massive, there was something about it, stooped, still, watchful. The iron gate to the porch was closed, so Rose slipped into the shadows. She stayed low, avoiding the eyes of passing gendarmes, clinging to ivy-draped corners, moving like a stray cat through the streets. She made her way around the manor's perimeter, watching for signs of movement, but the place felt abandoned, or perhaps waiting. With one hand gripping the stone, Rose climbed. Midway up the wall, her shoe caught in the gnarled web of vines. She tried to steady herself, but slipped, tumbling with a soft grunt onto the other side. Thud, a spike of pain in her ankle. From the satchel strapped to her back, Percy, her ever-watchful cat, hissed indignantly. Rose winced.
That's fair.
The ankle throbbed. Climbing back over the wall wouldn't be an option. If she wanted to leave, she'd have to walk out the front. She limped forward. The garden was silent, tidy in that uncanny way that felt too controlled. The back door gave way without protest. Rose slipped off her shoes, letting her stockinged feet tread silently over the stone floor. The kitchen was bare. Not just empty of life, but stripped of it. No pots, no dishes, not even a chair. Only the stone oven, older than the walls around it. It reminded her of funerary vaults she'd seen beneath Paris. The rest of the ground floor offered nothing, just drawn curtains and an echo that wasn't quite her own. She took the stairs slowly. Each creak of the carved wood sounded louder than the last. At the top, she emerged onto a narrow terrace, looking down onto the entry hall below. She pressed forward. Most of the upstairs rooms were just as barren. One held a chaise longue, its velvet eaten by age, a shawl draped over the back like a ghost clinging to memory. But it was the door at the end of the corridor that drew her. Something about it didn't look like the others. It was older, heavy, Renaissance crafted with carved figures, hunters with spears, stags mid-leap, hounds baying. The closer she got, the worse she felt. It was like walking into her own funeral. Her hand touched the door, and everything broke. A wave of hopelessness crashed into her, not fear, not dread, but a simple, unbearable truth. There was no reason to go on. Why keep searching? Why keep breathing? Why fight? Her legs moved on their own, slowly carrying her back to the terrace rail. She climbed, perched, looking out over the empty garden.
Maybe it's better this way,
She thought.
Mama.
The image of her mother at the Gulf of Nodens, ashen, begging forgiveness, pressed into her mind like frost. Below her, the ground waited. Then, mew. The softest sound. Percy. From her bag, a little paw pressed against the flap. It was small, stupid even. But it was real. The moment cracked. Rose gasped, choking on her own breath. She climbed back on the other side of the rail, dropping to the floor, hands shaking. Whatever had gripped her was gone, but its residue clung to her bones. Tears ran down her cheeks. She didn't bother to wipe them. She limped down the stairs, pulled on her shoes, and walked straight through the front door and out into the cold night. She didn't hear Leopold until he was right there, emerging from the shadows beside the garden wall, panting lightly from the climb up the hill. Rose jumped, almost yelping from pure exhaustion and nerves. He froze.
It's just me.
She blinked at him, disoriented. Leopold looked her over once, carefully, and gave a stiff, awkward pat on the shoulder. Then shrugged off his leather jacket and passed it to her wordlessly. Together, they turned their backs on the house. The bell of Lausanne Cathedral tolled 9 o'clock in the distance. Double murder. Back at Le Chat Noir, laughter had long since faded into unease. Maximilian twirled the stem of his wineglass, a look of theatrical disappointment on his face.
Such a shame your friend Leopold never returned. Ah well, such are the mysterious comings and goings of gentlemen.
He rose and strolled to the counter to pay. But when he returned, his cheeks were flushed red, not from drink, but from embarrassment.
My friends, it appears I've run out of funds for the week. Papa's accounts, you know, dreadfully unreliable. Would one of you mind?
A beat of silence, Claudia ever composed.
I'll pay.
But Elijah stood sharply.
You what? Number? I feel cheated.
He glared at Maximilian.
Let's take this outside. I'd like a word.
Maximilian straightened, his posture suddenly noble and cold.
How dare you suggest such a thing? you pleb.
The tension broke when Jerome, the sommelier, arrived.
What is going on here?
He looked from Maximilian to Elijah, then slowly took the young man by the arm and ushered him outside.
My sincerest apologies.
Jerome said,
A guest who enters a restaurant with no means to pay is inexcusable. Please do not judge Lausanne too harshly. Dinner is on the house.
Claudia, gathering her gloves, leaned in to Elijah and Giovanni.
I sent Rose to the Duke's manor. Leopold followed her. I am certain they will be fine. But I do worry about Edgar.
Elijah exhaled sharply.
We should go.
The three of them hailed a cab, the shadows of Lausanne flickering past the windows as they returned to the Wellington residence. Rue Saint-Étienne was quiet now. A light glowed in the upper window of the taxidermy shop. The hanging sign still read open, despite the hour. The door creaked open without protest. Inside, the fire still burned in the hearth, but something in the air had changed. It felt thick, like something had shifted just moments before they arrived. Their footsteps echoed, then a trail, streaks of red leading from the front hall to the workshop in the back. Giovanni whispered a prayer. They followed. There, slumped on the floor beneath a half-mounted bear, lay William Wellington. He had been stabbed multiple times, in the chest, the back. The bear loomed above him, its black eyes glassy and unblinking. Elijah knelt beside him. The man's jaw, already ruined from war, was frozen in a silent scream. A chunk of skin had been excised from his chest. Giovanni's knuckles whitened around his crucifix. Claudia's heart dropped. She had seen this before. The corpse at the Oriental Club in London. Someone had taken skin just as then. They didn't wait. Claudia grabbed a fire poker. Elijah and Giovanni armed themselves with ash scrapers. Giovanni began praying in Latin, each syllable echoing off the carved wood and shuttered glass. They crept up the stairs. At the first door to the left, they paused. Elijah pushed it open. Edgar Wellington lay motionless on the bed. But this wasn't suicide. Elijah leaned in, scanning the body.
2 fresh injection marks. Left arm. Expected, but...
He turned the wrist.
1 in the right arm. Not self-inflicted.
There had been no struggle, no thrashing, just sleep and death. As Claudia searched the room, she retrieved the same diary Leopold had read hours earlier. She read aloud,
The Duke has given me something for my insomnia. I slept deeply, dreamed of Lausanne in olden times. 2 nights ago, I held a brass button in my hand as I slept. Set it down in Dream Lausanne. When I awoke, it was gone. The next night, I fetched it back. When I woke, it was in my hand. I have hidden the scroll in Dream Lausanne for safekeeping.
At the foot of the bed, Claudia spotted a scroll tucked underneath. She pulled it out. The parchment was dry, fragile, but something about it felt wrong. Elijah was already checking the desk. Inside a hidden nook, he found a green bottle, carefully labeled Dream Lausanne. Alongside it, a morphine receipt. They shared a look.
If Edgar had brought the scroll back,
Claudia whispered,
he'd have been awake. There'd be evidence, signs of a fight. But this, he was murdered in his sleep. The scroll is a fake.
They searched the rest of the house, William's room, the kitchen, but found nothing else of note. Finally, Claudia wrapped the fake scroll in a cloth. Giovanni whispered a final prayer. Then they called the gendarmes. They claimed to have arrived to commission a new piece, only to find the grisly scene. The police were skeptical, but finding no motive, took their testimony and departed. Outside, the wind shifted over Lausanne. Tea at the chateau. The great doors of the Chateau Duchy groaned softly as Rose and Leopold entered, stepping out of Lausanne's cold night into the hotel's golden warmth. The reception desk was quiet, the concierge nodding respectfully as they passed. In the grand hall beyond, firelight danced against polished stone, painting long shadows that flickered along the marble walls. Leopold, with his usual silence, guided Rose into the drawing room. Her face was still pale, the weight of whatever had happened in the Duke's manor etched into her expression. Without a word, he returned a few minutes later, carrying a porcelain cup of steaming tea set carefully on a silver tray.
It is very kind of you.
Rose said softly.
Leo?
She hesitated. The fire cracked softly beside them.
I don't know why you came. I'm happy you were there. But Ms. Eddy has told me not to spend time in private with you.
Her voice wasn't harsh, only uncertain. Leopold said nothing at first. He merely nodded. 1,000 things hung in the space between them. Rose's head was spinning, thinking back on what had happened, what she had almost done. But Rose wasn't ready to share it yet, and Leopold, for all his practiced detachment, understood that kind of silence.
I'll order room service,
she murmured, eyes distant.
Rest a bit. Wait for the others.
Before he turned to leave, Rose stood on her toes and pressed a brief, fleeting kiss to his cheek.
Thank you,
she whispered. Outside her door, Leopold stood a moment longer than necessary, his hand lingering near the wood. Then he turned and made his way back to Le Chat Noir, retracing his steps through the quiet streets. Inside the bistro, Jérôme the sommelier greeted him with a surprised expression.
Ah, monsieur, I'm afraid your friends have already left. I do not know where they went.
Leopold gave a short nod, his face unreadable. He returned to the Chateau Duchy, where the halls had grown quieter, the night thick and heavy with snowfall. The bell from the Lausanne Cathedral rang out the hour, 10. Rose was resting. The others were still absent. And outside, across the water, the wind carried something colder than ice. The Door of Souls. The iron gate to the Duke's manor groaned in the wind, left flung open as though someone had forgotten to close it. Crisp night air bit into their cheeks as Claudia, Elijah and Giovanni crossed the threshold. Their weapons, a fire poker and a pair of ash scrapers, gleamed dully under the moonlight. The front door, too, stood ajar. The house offered no resistance, only silence. Inside, the ground floor remained eerily quiet, rooms stripped of life, windows drowned in heavy curtains, no tables, no furniture, just echoes of what had been, and a lingering sense that they were being watched not by eyes, but by the house itself. They mounted the stairs slowly. With each step, an unfamiliar sadness clung to them, a sorrow not their own, something ancient. At the end of the upper hallway, the same carved door waited, the Renaissance monstrosity depicting a hunting scene, spears poised, hounds mid-leap, stags frozen in flight. Giovanni paused before it, feeling the ache of lost souls clinging to the wood. No scripture, just presence. Claudia, her voice trembling with purpose, whispered a strange prayer, an odd mix of Latin and Yiddish, her words crackling against the air like frost. Only she could see Marco, now reduced to a single pair of eyes, floating in a void of darkness, trapped in his homunculus form. His presence was different, no longer teasing, no longer mocking, only anger. She reached toward him. Touching him, she heard something else, a whisper from the door itself. "We want to sleep." Desperate, plural, inhuman. She staggered back. Without another word, Giovanni turned and headed down the back stairs to check the garden. Upstairs, Elijah reached for the door handle, using the shawl to shield his fingers. The poker trembled in his grip, but as he pressed the handle, it slipped, clattering loudly against the frame. Claudia stepped in without hesitation, took the shawl and turned the handle. The door opened, and stone greeted them. The manor was the same, but not. The walls were now carved from ancient grey stone, like the undercroft of some medieval keep. A thin layer of dust coated everything, yet the air was heavy. Not dead, but dreaming. They passed the threshold and into the stone corridor. Their clothes had changed. Elijah looked down, startled, his wool vest replaced with robes of the era, his boots thicker, older. Claudia's coat had become an embroidered mantle, her gloves replaced with soft leather. Their weapons remained. The room that once held a chaise longue now had a luxurious medieval bed, carved and draped in crimson. They took the stairs, making for the ground floor.
"Where are we?"
Elijah murmured. Claudia looked around, heart sinking.
I think we're in Dream Lausanne.
Above them, the door to reality slammed itself shut. Below, Giovanni found nothing in the real garden. The night was still, save for the stirring of the trees and the faint toll of a bell in the distance. He returned upstairs.
Claudia?
He called. No answer.
Elijah?
Stillness. Then he saw the door. A whisper seemed to rise from the walls. Sleep. 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 Giovanni gritted his teeth, muttered a prayer, and grabbed the handle. It was like grabbing the tongue of a devil, his mind seared with despair, dread flooding him like cold water. He shoved the door open, stepped through.
Hold the door!
Claudia shouted.
Don't let it close!
Elijah added, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind him. Giovanni turned. Only a small socket for a handle. He descended the stairs of the dream mansion, boots echoing on stone. At the bottom, he found them. Claudia, Elijah. The procession of the sleepless. When Claudia, Elijah, and Giovanni opened the front door of the dream manor, the world outside had changed. Gone were the winding streets of modern Lausanne. Gone were the iron gates, the street lamps, the quiet murmur of city life. Before them stretched a small prairie, dew-frosted and still. The city beyond had shrunk, its streets fewer, the buildings now thatched and timbered, crooked with age and sagging under the weight of centuries. Above them, the sky was a tumult of black and violet, with nacreous streaks slowly crawling towards some distant, pulsing heaven of darkness. It glowed with a light that had never touched the waking world. And rising through it all, the bell of the cathedral tolled again and again. A procession moved through the ancient streets. Figures, familiar ones, people they'd seen that very day in Lausanne, were now clad in medieval garb, their faces blank, their eyes cast downward. They walked in total silence, drifting like phantoms up toward the cathedral. Giovanni stepped forward, eyes wide.
The church is calling them.
He felt it in his bones, a summoning, slow and irresistible.
It must be for a reason,
he said. Claudia and Elijah exchanged a look, and then they joined the silent tide. They moved as one. As the three investigators merged into the stream of townsfolk, they too were swept toward the looming outline of the cathedral, its spires like black claws grasping for the sky. Everywhere, the streets were wrong. Between the crumbling alleys, gibbets stood silently, many of them occupied. The bodies were still, rotted by time and dream, swaying with the occasional gust of wind from above. There were no birds, just silence, and the bell tolling in slow, guttural rhythm. A vast fissure opened before them, gaping and jagged, leading upward like a scar in the land. From within, a wind blew cold as death, whispering words none of them could understand. They walked. And then, suddenly, the crowd halted. A procession passed in the opposite direction. Figures of grotesque pageantry, each one a walking metaphor in flesh. One cloaked as death, scythe dragging behind. Another as an angel, blindfolded, wings painted in ash. A soldier, breastplate etched with screams. A lion in regal garb, with real wings erupting from his back. A Turk, richly dressed, his mouth sewn shut. An assassin, face hidden by wrappings. And a couple, dressed as a lassie and a lad, their eyes hollow. They wept tears of blood, chanting in Latin, the hours of the day, sung in reverse. Giovanni understood every word, time folded backward in their song. Then, as they passed, the lion spread its wings and soared into the sky, vanishing beyond the nacre clouds. The crowd began to move once more. The ground beneath their feet grew soft. The air grew sweet. Garlic blossoms and white-flowered bulbs littered the cobbles, clumps of strange, forgotten flora. The scent was cloying, dizzying. It lingered in the throat like perfume on a corpse. And then Claudia noticed it.
The shadows,
she whispered. No one had any, every person walking that lane, shadowless. They left the flowers behind. Ahead, a crooked lane curved toward an old crone, bent over a cauldron that hissed and steamed. She beckoned with one gnarled hand, offering wooden bowls to those passing by. Food for the journey, she croaked. Giovanni and Elijah circled around her, unwilling to taste whatever was brewing. But Claudia, ever curious, dared a glance. and saw writhing human limbs, skinned and steaming, dancing against one another like puppets in broth. She barely held down her bile. Further along, the crowd paused again. A street magician, dressed in harlequin tatters, smiled broadly. "Watch closely, friends." He plunged his hand into a straw hat. It vanished, then his arm, his shoulders. Blood ran freely, but he kept smiling, giggling as the last of his torso vanished into nothing. "Thank you for the show," he whispered, and died. The cathedral loomed ever larger now, its bell tolling with unnatural weight. They reached a checkered square, black and white tiles stretching in all directions. There, humanoid stone statues, carved in the form of chess pieces, moved with sentience, fighting one another in brutal silence. Stone clashed against stone, limbs cracked and flew. The crowd cheered, their dead voices echoing in unison. When the Black King stood alone, victorious, the procession resumed. Just before the final ascent to the cathedral, they passed a towering figure, assembled of wires, its body wrapped in fluttering rags. At least they looked like rags. Elijah, curious, stepped closer and was nearly overcome. The rags were not fabric, but flesh, torn and rotting, clinging to the wires like meat to hooks. The air around it stank of sweet decay, of perfume and sickness and heat. Something inside the mass twitched. He gasped and stumbled back, rejoining Claudia and Giovanni, who had wisely kept to the far wall. The cathedral loomed just ahead. The trial of Edgar Wellington. The square before the cathedral was transformed. Where once cobblestones had laid clean and empty, now a great platform had been erected, black wood and bronze, like something from an inquisitor's dream. The procession of sleepwalkers gathered in tight, reverent silence, faces upturned beneath a sky of nacre and ash. At the center of the platform stood three figures. A bronze statue, Otto the grandson, once perched atop the cathedral. Now he stood here, watching, inert but listening. A hooded, bound man, slumped forward in chains. Edgar Wellington. His breaths came fast and shallow, and Claudia, upon seeing him, gripped Elijah's sleeve.
That's him. It's Edgar.
And the third, a fat, crowned noble, swaddled in ermine robes and brocade, face rosy with theatrical delight. His voice rang out in the still air, laced with arrogance.
Before us stands a man accused of grievous crimes. His failure to relinquish what belongs to this realm marks him as an enemy.
He giggled almost girlishly.
And thus, he must stand trial before his prince, me.
His eyes sparkled as they raked the crowd.
Does anyone here dare to defend the accused, to speak for this miserable soul?
A silence fell across the square, thick and suffocating. And then Giovanni stepped forward.
Yes,
the priest said.
I will do it, but what gives you the power to judge, if not the Lord himself?
The Duke gave a mocking bow.
I am invested with divine power, of course. I am the Prince of Dream Lausanne, priest. I wield truth in velvet gloves. Please, do join us.
Giovanni climbed the steps, boots echoing. As he approached, Edgar followed him with his eyes, stunned.
Oh, thank God. You were with Miss Claudia Eddy in the crowd just now, yes?
Yes,
Giovanni said softly.
He tortured me. The Duke. Before the crowd came. He said I'd die either way.
His voice cracked.
But listen, if you escape, go to my shop. In the workshop, inside the taxidermized bear's mouth. The real scroll is hidden there.
Giovanni squeezed his shoulder.
I'm here to help you cross. We've already found your body in the waking world.
Edgar gave a broken laugh.
Of course, I figured as much. Then, this is all a dream, a last act. Oh, and the handle to the door back, it's hidden under a stone, just beneath the manor's front steps.
Giovanni nodded.
I'll remember.
The Duke stepped forward with pomp.
Now then, who shall offer themselves as justice tonight?
The crowd erupted, a violent frenzy of bodies, all clamoring toward the platform. A young girl, no older than 14, pushed her way through. She climbed to the statue of Otto, her face radiant with some inner madness. With a scream, she tore the flesh from her face, pressed it to the statue's cheek, and died. The statue began to breathe. The Duke, unfazed, pushed her corpse back into the crowd with a flick of his cane. And the trial had begun. The square fell silent. All around the cathedral, the citizens of Dream Lausanne, draped in rotted robes, with waxen expressions and hands that twitched with anticipation, stood still as tombstones. The bells above tolled no longer. Only the breathing of the bronze statue, Otto the grandson, broke the hush. On the scaffold, the Duke, bloated with pride and swaddled in ermine and silks that strained against his flesh, cleared his throat with theatrical flair.
Let us proceed.
He grinned toward the crowd, raising one pale hand like a conductor ready to begin a symphony of madness. He turned toward Giovanni, his voice now razor-sharp.
Priest, you shall reply to each charge, and the judge, our good bronze Otto, shall determine whose voice speaks truth and whose speaks treason.
He gestured toward the statue of Otto.
Let the first charge be heard.
The crowd stirred like restless birds. The Duke's voice thundered across the plaza.
This traitor refused to cooperate with the duly assigned officers of the realm. When summoned to appear before the People's Court of Lausanne, he did not come meekly. No. He kicked, he screamed, he stirred uproar in the street.
He chuckled, a wheezing, spoiled lamb sort of sound.
Such behavior undermines my authority. Were he innocent, he would have come humbly. Instead, he fought, and thus proved his guilt.
He turned smug.
What say you, priest?
Giovanni stepped forward. His cassock shifted in the windless air. He gripped his crucifix, gaze lifted to the statue above, then turned to the faceless crowd.
Citizens of Lausanne,
he began, voice firm, his Italian accent rich with purpose.
Isn't it God alone who grants the right to charge another? It is not the place of mortals to pass judgment in shadows with no scripture nor saint.
He gestured toward the cathedral behind them.
This holy ground, this church, was built not in your name, Prince, but in his. The meek inherit heaven, not punishment. There is no justice in your claim, only vanity.
He looked back to Otto, lifting his chin.
And so I ask, what does he decide?
The bronze statue groaned. Its head turned, slowly, heavily toward Giovanni. The crowd gasped. The Duke's face twisted in rage, his jowls quivering.
Blasphemy,
he hissed.
But fine, let us continue. I am generous, after all.
He clenched his jeweled fists and prepared his next accusation. The Duke turned back toward the crowd, arms flung wide like an actor at the crescendo of his soliloquy.
Well then, the second charge, people of Lausanne. Gather close, open your ears to reason.
The crowd leaned in, hundreds of eyes gleaming with a feverish hunger.
This man, this traitor, is a foreigner, and that his spirited defenders cannot deny. There the Englishman stands, a blight upon our proud streets.
He gestured flamboyantly to Edgar, his jowls quivering with theatrical rage.
We of Lausanne take pride in our purity of blood, in our unity, in the comfort of being bound by shared origin and will. His presence, this alien weed, undermines that unity.
His voice grew low and bitter.
He is a cancer, one that must be cut out.
A murmur rippled through the crowd. Giovanni stepped forward, voice stern.
Are you placing yourself above the Lord? You who speak of blood and unity, is it not the Lord who gathers all under his love, who binds us by faith, not heritage?
He pointed to the cathedral behind them, its spires catching the strange twilight.
This ground is sacred, not yours. Who gave you this power? What right do you have to judge his children?
For a moment, there was stillness. But then, with an ominous groan of strained metal, Otto the grandson's statue turned, not toward Giovanni, but toward the Duke. A tremor of discomfort ran through the crowd. The Duke's lip curled.
So be it.
His voice rose again, now giddy, drunk on the attention.
Let us not stop at birthright. No, we must address the greatest offense of all.
The crowd began to stir again, shifting, whispering.
We accuse this enemy before us of possessing forbidden knowledge.
He leaned forward, eyes wild.
This man, this deceiver, entered our realm with knowledge he concealed, with a scroll, a sacred artifact, mine by right, and he sought to keep it hidden. Why, citizens? Why would he hide it if not to conspire?
He slammed his cane down.
It is a mine planted beneath our foundations, a lie wrapped in parchment. Were he honest, he'd return it. Were he loyal, he'd yield.
He spread his arms in mock sorrow.
But he mocks us, mocks me. He hoards it, secrets it away. I say he must be punished for treachery.
He turned to Otto, triumphant.
I call upon the judge. Determine him guilty, for his crimes are plain.
Beside the scaffold, Claudia felt the fake scroll shift in her coat. She met Elijah's eyes, and in that instant, a silent plan passed between them. Not yet, but soon, Giovanni, with controlled defiance, stepped forward once more.
So this is all about a scroll, a document? What heresy could possibly lie in a scroll to demand death?
The Duke's voice dropped to a hiss.
Because it is supposed to be mine.
And then Otto turned, his mechanical eyes grinding with slow certainty, toward Giovanni. The Duke screamed, furious at the shared authority.
Why should I endure this mockery, this farce of a trial? It is my realm, damn you, mine.
He turned to the statue and spat.
You bloody artifact.
And then Claudia spoke, loud, clear, final.
Oh, Duke, but we have the scroll.
Time stopped. The crowd froze. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, expressions a mingling of awe, hunger, and fear. The Duke blinked. His pupils dilated. Then he began to salivate. His whole body shook in glee. A piece of flesh slipped from beneath his collar and landed unnoticed on the stage beside him.
Bring it to me.
He quivered like a man at the edge of rapture. The lyres in the morning light. The Duke danced, the scroll clutched in his swollen, gloved hands like a child's prize, his silks trembling with glee.
I've won,
he shouted, voice high and giddy.
I've got the scroll. I've got the scroll.
He spun on his heels, eyes bloodshot and joyous, staring down at Claudia, Giovanni, Elijah, and Edgar Wellington.
You may leave,
he said, panting.
I am merciful, after all.
They didn't wait. They ran. Giovanni nearly tripped on the ancient cobbles, caught mid-fall by Elijah, who dragged him up without a word. Claudia sprinted ahead, leading Edgar through the twisted streets of Dream Lausanne, past the gibbets and silent statues, the alleyways now swarming with attention that hummed like bees behind walls. At the dream reflection of the Wellington shop, Edgar dashed inside and reached into the mouth of the taxidermized bear, his hand vanishing up to the wrist, then emerging again, clutching the real scroll.
Here,
he said breathlessly, placing it in Claudia's hands.
Now run.
They turned. Ahead, the Duke's manor looming like a waiting wound. Claudia knelt, pried up the loose stone beside the threshold, just as Edgar had said. Beneath it, the iron handle, cold as memory. She fitted it into the door, and that's when they heard it.
Fetch the lyres to me.
The voice came not from the sky, nor the ground, but through the bones of the city, the crowd of Lausanne, the same dream people who had once marched silently, now moved like a single organism, pouring into the streets, teeth bared, eyes glowing. They were coming. The door groaned open. One by one they slipped through, Claudia, Elijah, Giovanni, and Edgar. But as Edgar crossed the threshold, he stumbled. He gasped, eyes wide, then crumbled into a swirl of violet ash, dissolving mid-step. Only the scroll remained, now gripped tightly in Claudia's arms. Giovanni fell to one knee, murmuring a swift and reverent prayer.
Rest in peace.
The door slammed shut. Giovanni, beads of his rosary clutched in one hand, pulled 4 free and pressed them to the wood, whispering in Latin. The symbols glowed faintly, then faded, and then silence. The manor stood still. They opened the real-world door and found themselves back in Lausanne. Morning. The sky was clean and pale blue. The church bells tolled softly, calling the city to its waking rhythm. The cold light of January cut through the fog, and the Orient Express was about to depart. They raced to the station, boots pounding stone, breath visible in clouds. Not one of them spoke, not until the grand building of Gare de Lausanne came into view, and they saw two figures, Leopold and Rose, weary-eyed, standing by a pile of luggage, waiting anxiously by the platform. When they saw the others, their shoulders slackened, and for the first time in hours, relief broke over all of them like sunlight. They boarded together. A warning on the rails. The sun had barely risen, casting golden bars across the Orient Express, as the investigators were ushered into the dining car for a light breakfast. Steam coiled from coffee cups. Porcelain clinked, and through the broad windows, Lausanne faded into mist, already reduced to a speck on the horizon, a ghost of stone and sleep. Claudia, Giovanni, Elijah, Rose, and Leopold sat silently, still pale from their ordeal, wrapped in silence and subtle glances. The waiters smiled, the train hummed, and then a voice broke through.
Pardonnez-moi, may I join you?
A deep French accent, unmistakably cultured and invasive. They turned as one, and saw him, the Duc des Esseintes, smiling, real, on the train. Their blood ran cold. He lowered himself into a chair opposite them, folding his rotund hands over his belly, the faint scent of perfume and rot hanging around him.
You will excuse my bluntness,
he said smoothly.
I'll come to the point. I want the scroll.
His smile widened, showing too many teeth.
You will give it to me, or I will destroy. Your answer, promptly. I have very little time.
The investigators stared at him, stunned, but within moments they began to murmur denials, heads tilting in polite confusion.
We had strange dreams,
said Claudia, eyes wide with feigned naivete.
But we don't recall them,
added Elijah, calm.
We woke here with nothing,
Giovanni said, touching his crucifix. The Duke's eye twitched. Leopold noticed it first. Though the train moved, no one else in the dining car did. Waiters frozen mid-step, a coffee cup hovering between table and mouth. Even the window outside, the view of the Alps, seemed locked in place. They were alone in motion.
I will show you,
the Duke said, eyes sliding toward Rose. He snapped his fingers. Rose gasped. She clutched her throat, her body twisting, skin shriveling. Within seconds, she looked 60, brittle, a fragile husk of herself. She collapsed, gasping for air, lips dry, face lined. The Duke stood, flourishing a length of rope from inside his sleeve. He wound it once around himself, smirking.
That is why you should not defy the prince.
And then he vanished. The room shuddered, and the world resumed. Chatter returned, forks clinked, a waiter passed, none the wiser. Elijah rushed to Rose, but she was gasping, her limbs shaking, her eyes rolled.
Water!
Claudia cried. Leopold tore open her blouse collar, checking her pulse, whispering to her as he steadied her head. Another doctor, a tall man with a Belgian accent, came running, splashing her face with cold water and offering salts. Her breathing steadied, slowly. They carried her to Claudia's berth, each step heavy with dread. Later, as the sun climbed above the mountains, they drew the curtains and gathered close. Claudia unwrapped the scroll Edgar had died for. She began to read.
This scroll is written by Sedefkar Osmanli. It concerns an item in his possession, the Sedefkar Simulacrum. In this scroll, Sedefkar prophesies that he was soon to lose the simulacrum, and so praises it, and records it in a set of 5 scrolls.
Claudia's voice grew steadier.
This is the first of the 5. It is referred to as the Scroll of the Head, being the thoughts and history of Sedefkar.
She scanned further.
The 4 missing scrolls are the Scroll of the Belly, about the worship of the Skinless One, the Scroll of the Legs, concerning body-altering magic, the Scroll of the Right Hand, the ritual that awakens the simulacrum, and the Scroll of the Left Hand, a counterbalancing ritual, requiring a continuous sacrifice.
She hesitated.
The scroll is rambling. Madam, most of it describes torture, skinning, ecstasy through pain.
No one spoke for a long while. They now knew, to destroy the simulacrum, they needed the rest of the scrolls. Outside, the train rattled toward Milan, the sky brilliant and cold. Inside Claudia's berth, 5 souls sat in a wound of silence, broken only by the occasional whistle of the wind. The date was January 12th.